this time, returning to the peace of my mind. Fear falls away, crack the shell of a new day.
Hey, Aboroboy, this is Olu Fakola Dev Idin Kaifa Temple. Thank you so much for joining us. Today is going to be a very special Makings of Men discussion, and we're going to bring in a really great brother who I respect. I've seen a lot of his work and his development and African language and so many things. And I greatly respect him. I always want to bring brothers that we respect and value and can get some good information and sustenance from with this Makings of Men platform. This is something that it is a process, even of rites of passage, that we can do somewhat virtually and also see what ethical men, good folks in Ifa look like. So I want to introduce a brother who is an Ifa priest. He's a teacher, a Yoruba language enthusiast. I think he's a Yoruba language scholar, humbly, an author, African-American griot who uses the proverbs of hip hop and R&B. Please support me in welcoming Baba Ade Fumbukola, also known as Ori Ire. Let us add this brother to our cipher. My brother, good to see you. Thank you for joining us so much, man.
Good to see you too. I'm happy to be here. I'm honored. I love your platform, everything that you do as well.
Man, thank you so much. You know, I have to thank you also again on here, you know, just for being with us and joining us, because I know how the things are going on in the world in terms of time and timing, and it's so good that we're able to link. And I'm just so humbled that you took the time to build with me today. So with that, you know what I'm saying? Let's hop into it. You know, I want to know, brother, what is your name basically, and where are you from? Give us that information.
Okay, so I have several different names, you know, which is common in this tradition. And it's funny, depending on when people met me in life, they may prefer a different name. So Ade is one of my birth names. My mother went to a Babalawo to do a naming ceremony when she was in the process of discovering African spirituality for herself. And I'm sure we'll get into that. Also, Efumbukola, Ifakorede. Yeah, so most people know me as Orire online, which just simply means, like, as you know, one who has like a blessed head.
Right. Very good. And Baba, where are you from? Like, where you, not only where you located, but are you from that location?
I'm from DC. So my father is Haitian, came here when he was a kid. My other side of the family comes from the South, but me, I'm a DC native. I'm from the city, as we say.
Ashe, man. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So one thing that I've noticed is that is, when you mentioned your family, you mentioned your father from IT and mother from the South. That's a really powerful kind of blending of African diasporic ethnicities and revolutionary traditions. But I also noticed that you and your brother are involved in multiple African traditions. Like you both also have fluency in what I noticed was I think your brother speaks Twi,
Mhm.
Yoruba,
Mhm.
and I think you both are speaking Creole.
Mhm.
Um, that for me alone is very powerful, man. So, what inspired you both to embrace African traditions in this way?
Wow. So on the language piece alone, I always have to give credit to the genealogy of, like many of the ideas that we discuss and we hold dear is because generations and generations have built, sequentially upon these things. So with the language, for example, um, I grew up for a long time going to a African Center school here in DC. And so just a little bit of history about that African Center School movement. Around the 60s and the 70s, there was an explosion of independent Black institutions around the country, out in Cali and Jersey, Atlanta, Philly, all the rest of these, right? And some of them have since closed. When I was younger, we would have what's called the CB Science Fair, where you would have all these schools from around the country. They come together to do a science fair, and it was like maybe 1,000 kids. But all that to say, around the 60s and the 70s, as they started trying to redefine education from an African lens, they realized that language was an important piece. And so it started with many of our elders adopting Kiswahili kind of as a language of the movement, whether that's in Kwanzaa, whether it's in a lot of these schools and communities, people using greetings, Jambo, Habari Gani, things like that. And so I say that to say I'm a child of that. In the school that I went to, although it was at a basic level, they made us learn Yoruba greetings. They made us learn Kiswahili. They made us learn Twi and things like that. And so for me, those seeds were kind of always in me that language is an important part of decolonization. And the last thing I'll say, one of my professors at Howard said this to me. He said, language is the way that people first began to describe and perceive their environment. And so I thought about that. I'm like, dang, so we're talking about moving away from these harmful Eurocentric ideals, but we're still describing and seeing the environment only in the way that they did. So I was like, okay, all right, I got to at least, take some steps into beginning to look at, describe, perceive the environment, the universe in the way that my ancestors did. So all that to say, I think for both me and my brother, we come from that lineage, both family and, communal lineage. And so for us, it's just like, all right, we're going to do this thing. The language got to be a big piece of it. And the last thing I'll say to answer that in terms of the multiple traditions themselves, like you said, we children of us folks from the diaspora, we children of this and that and this and that. It's hard to just say, oh, we come from one particular place. So I got the Haitian Vodou in my family, Akan, Yoruba, different ones. So to me, they're just different ways to connect to the same source. I don't necessarily see them as separate.
Ooh, man, that's powerful, bro, because when I think about that as well, you mentioned decolonization, which is essential in this process of Ifa and just African traditions in general, because we have to begin to describe the world in the way not only our ancestors described it and envision a world in that same language, but also to embrace an aspect of ourselves that was untouched by the hands of the colonizer. And this is a really interesting process because it's really like kind of sifting your culture or the cultures that you are practicing through like this very interesting sieve to figure out, all right, what is African and what is not. And then when we explode that just from the language piece on a African spirituality piece, the other thing that I see when you say that is like, how many of us are really practicing African spirituality? You know what I'm saying? Because the other issue is like, you know, like this is something that I battle with in terms of seeing here in LA is like, okay, we're practicing Ifa, but still demonizing Black folks. We're practicing Ifa, but I just offer a bowl with these animals and I just threw them away. That's food though. I'm practicing Ifa, but we're tarnishing the river when we offer the abo, and that's like that explodes so much more when you talk about language. What comes with language comes philosophy, comes cosmology. There's certain words when I'm using Ifa verses, some words you can't even translate into English because there's no equivalent. There's absolutely no equivalent for that word. You have to describe it in a roundabout way. And so using language allows us to really kind of touch an aspect of ourselves that is untainted. You know, I'm thinking about the elder, great ancestor Gugi wa Thiong'o, and the elder Gugi wa Thiong'o, and discussing the decolonization of the mind and using particular African language to write much of his African literature. I noticed when I was in Nigeria the last time, maybe in 2023, some of my brothers there, they were starting some organization around, like a thought process of liberation, where essential to the liberation of Yoruba people and the Yoruba nation and all others is the use of language, is using that. But also you mentioned Kiswahili, which is so important as well, because when you bring up your brother and the tree and all these things, it's like it's important for us to have a bridge that we can communicate with, with like even with Haitian Creole, out here, Pig Latin, and so many things. We have to begin to not only love but also embrace that. When you mention those things, were you born into African spirituality, or like was it? You mentioned certain things, but is this essentially part of your lineage, blood wise?
Man, that's a great question. And some people always like, whenever I ask the questions, I always got to step back and start with the historical context to answer any question, But I got to do that. So I'll say, to answer that question specifically, for my family, it's been a generational kind of process of passing the baton and then running their lap. And I said to say, my father's family being from Haiti, you know how us Haitians can be. Like on the surface, it might be Catholicism, but we got them people that do a little bit of this, a little bit of that in the family. So on the Haitian side, we have some Vodou practitioners. We've had to dig for it to come out. So from my father's side, they kind of have their own connections and ties to this, and my father's had to uncover stuff. On my mother's side, they come from North Carolina. We've recently discovered some hoodoo there, but I'll give credit to my grandmother on my mother's side. Quick story, not to go off on too much of a tangent. Grandmother. Okay. Well, you just said the magic words to me, so I will go off on a little bit of a tangent. Please. My family on that side is from North Carolina, Durham, and my grandmother was at North Carolina Central at the time, and she was selling door-to-door beauty products. I think it was like Avon or one of them at the time. And so she happened to knock on what would be my grandfather's door. And so, he kicked the game to her, which we would consider we would say, oh, that's that woke Hotep game. But he was genuine. He said, he was like, sister, why are you selling these products to lighten your skin and straighten your hair? You don't need. And she was a little bit like, okay. And he was like, don't you know that we come from African civilization? Da, da, da. And she said to him, she said, I'm in college. If that were true, I would know it. And at that time, there was no. This is right before the Black Studies, the movements happened to get Black Studies instituted on campus. Like I think for Howard, it came at the 70s, right? So this is in the 50s, early 60s. So he was like, all right, go read these books, come back to me. She went, she got the book, she came back, she was like, yo. So long story short, they get married, she quits college, they move to New York to join the Nation of Islam and work under Malcolm. So that I would say is the early seeds of consciousness on that side, but there was something that my grandmother, for some reason, I don't know if it's when Malcolm leaves the nation and starts to expand beyond Islam, where she, even though she was under the Nation of Islam, she decided to go get divination done from an Igbo priest or priestess. She adopted the name Ifeoma, and she gave my mother an Igbo name and some of my aunts and uncles African names. So all that to say, you get down to my parents' generation, they kind of in college had to discover this stuff and take their own steps. So I did grow up in this. However, as I was growing up, I watched my parents take their own steps. When I was like 12, my father did his initiation for the first time. So all of that to say, I did grow up in this, but even if you grow up in something, I know your sons will have to do the same thing. There comes a time where you have to own it for yourself or disown it. So I kind of had to go through my own processes. Not the last thing I'll say is my parents also practice a different African tradition that's not Ifa. They practice the Akal tradition from Ghana. So in many ways, I had to go out and get that on my own. But generational process, and they just passed me the baton. You know what I'm saying? And I'm running my lap.
That's right, man. That's dope. I mean, when you say that, bro, like the other thing I think about is, it's such a trite question, but it's real. It's like, what is that like to come up in an environment where perhaps this isn't, like initially demonized? That's one. And then the other thing I think about is when you mentioned that your grandparents, they moved to New York and they were under Malcolm and the Nation. Uniquely enough, from what I had studied, I remember learning that even, Ibaye Oba Sejiman, the founder of Oyotunji, he was there in the midst.
Harlem, yeah.
Like he was, like Malcolm was speaking on platforms, and he was in Harlem speaking on platforms as well, which is another really interesting thing in the sense of just I'm not taking anything away. I'm just kind of like mentioning when you mention Malcolm, it's like a sea of consciousness that was kind of happening in Harlem that's like kind of baptizing Black folks at that time in a really unique way from so many different angles. But what is that like growing up in such an environment where these things are not initially, quote unquote demonized or like, that's, like kind of having to jump that Christian hurdle or that Islamic hurdle or whatever we came through religion-wise to get here, not necessarily having to jump such a high of a hurdle. What is that like?
Man, these are some deep questions. I love it. I mean, I even think about your children, and I think about my children, watching them grow up. This is a culture, and it made me think about something that you mentioned earlier. I think the key to some of those things that you mentioned of not becoming someone who is in the most superficial aspects an Ifa practitioner, but in all the core, the way that we move, character, the way that we relate, we European. You know what I'm saying? You had mentioned that. One of the ways to get around that is to really just spend time in the culture. It's hard. You can't separate. You can't say, I'm just going to go there for a week do my Ifa initiation and ignore every other aspect of Yoruba culture because the answer lies in there. And so the way that I'm tying that back in is like culture almost is like a fish, you know what I'm saying, looking at not being able to see the water that it exists in, you know. And so for me, and I'm looking at my children, I'm thinking about your children, like it's like this is all you know. Like, of course you experience it outside the home, but it's just like, yo, doing that ball, pouring libation, all these things, it's just like, this is what we do. And I'm watching my kids now, and it's just like, you don't even have to tell them to do stuff. The drums start playing, and they doing their own dances, and they're mimicking what they see and what they know. Now, however, I will say, me growing up in the 90s and 2000s, this a whole different scene. I will say that, and I love it that you now have rappers, you have R&B singers, you have all these people. It's popular to do this stuff. I will say that part I did not grow up in. When I stepped outside the home, I used to have to figure out how to tell people, like, look, like, you know what I'm saying? I'm dating someone, I'm like, I just got to tell you, you know, we kill chickens. You know what I'm saying? Just I just want to let you know. And they'll be like, y'all do what? You know, so nowadays it's a little bit more it's common knowledge, you know what I'm saying? So it was all I knew, you know what I'm saying? The demonization came second when I started getting outside of the household, but it did come. You know.
Yeah, that's a different space from so many of us in terms of our takeoff point to this. That's, you know, it's a different space that we've experienced, you know, which kind of goes into the next question I want to get into. You touched on it for sure, but fatherhood, you know, we've talked about context, we've talked about history and what got you here. Now let's talk about some of this masculine energy in the sense of fatherhood. When I asked this question, I remember seeing a video of you performing rituals with your children. And I also saw the opposition, you know, different individuals kind of like making weird comments about that. And I guess I want to ask a couple of questions on that. Is what is it like to teach Black children about their African traditions? And in terms of the opposition, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with it? Because, you know, living in America, the dominant society consistently works to, you know, there are mechanisms essentially to destroy Black people. And it's not just, you know, it's in the media. You know what I'm saying? It's in the food. It's in the environment. How is teaching our traditions to our children healing?
That's a deep question. I mean, I think, well, a few things in what you said. Number one, you know, sometimes we act as though the American culture is not a culture, right? We act as though it's just neutral. You know, we're about people doing whatever. No. We live in a Christianity kind of underpins the foundation of everything that you see, the expressions that we use, everything like that. American culture is a culture. You know what I'm saying? So I think that kind of helps when you're thinking about raising your children, that a lot of time we say, oh, we just send them out there, they'll make their own decision. We don't know. You're sending them out there to be exposed to the strong influence of someone else's culture, you know. So I try to keep that in mind, you know. But I'll say, I think it's essential, you know, to raise Black children in this culture for several reasons. One of the reasons goes to the foundation of African spirituality, and there's something that lay elder Malidoma Some said, where it's like he talks about this process where it's like our spirits are constantly being shuttled from the land of the ancestors here. They go to the land of ancestors, they're recharged with a mission, and he says they put on a spacesuit and they go down to the land of the living to live out that mission. They complete that mission, they go back. And the reason why I say that is that's a core idea for most African spiritual traditions I've seen. We come here with a mission, a purpose. Children are given names that reflect that mission. And so for Black children, that's especially important. I'll even say for Black boys, that's especially important, because if you let them listen to that outside stuff, they will be told and bombarded with all types of negative things about what you mentioned, masculinity, what it means to be a man. They'll be bombarded and taught that. And so I know for me as a Black man, like all the negative stuff you see about us on TV and films, it's everywhere. Knowing my destiny in the context of Ifa is one of the things that grounds me. I'm not none of that stuff that y'all saying. It's in my Odu. It's in my name. It's in my soul. All that to say, like, I think, especially for Black children, giving them that identity, giving them those roots, they don't need to sway, you know what I'm saying, with all the negative, influences and things that are going to try to make them sway and make them fall.
That's great. That's an incredible response. Like the concept of Ifa being your identity, knowing your identity, like knowing who you are, man, that's so important. And then it's like a cultural insulation or inoculation. Hopefully I'm using the Professor or Dr. Marimba Ani's words correctly, like insulation or inoculation. It having your culture, it kind of inoculates you against the things that are happening out there in the world, and even protects. And this is part of the reason why I've been such a proponent of rites of passage, particularly here, and because people don't realize that there are other forms of rites of passage. There are negative forms of rites of passage. I live in a neighborhood where, like I grew up in a certain neighborhood, and I'm in a neighborhood now that's 40 Crip, and I grew up in a different neighborhood when I was, when I was growing up, but now I live here. And negotiating these interesting boundaries of Black American tribal war, the police, etc. And if you know who you are, you know where you should be. I don't need to be over there. This is who I am. This is where I belong. And just in that is a protection. That's such an important thing when we look at it in terms of our children. I want to ask you another question associated with manhood, because I think that as I talk about this process of rites of passage, it's not a virtual rites of passage, but it's like rites of passage that young men can kind of go on the internet and like, okay, these are some intelligent individuals. They're speaking about something that I'm interested in. It's unique. And so I want young folks to be able to see this and start to look and see themselves. So with that, I ask you this question: manhood. Who are some of your greatest examples of manhood? And who gave you the charge? Like, who was like, all right,
Man, these are deep questions, man. Okay, so I'll definitely start with my father for one. I'll say my father put the game down, you know what I'm saying, and it's funny, like there's things that you learn from teaching and ideology and saying this is what men do and da-da-da. And then there's things that you learn just from watching and looking. And so I'll say with my father, there's many things that he may have taught me in the first way. There's many things I just observed, like, he holds it down. You know what I'm saying? He probably the last one to finish when there's some work being done. He's gonna make sure he does. He built half of half of our house, added levels to it, built this, built that. All of these things, seeing him fix cars, seeing him, just how he handled all of these things, the work ethic, the sense of responsibility, duty, all these things. I'll say I definitely first observed that from my father. I say my grandfather too, and then I'll extend that to say, there were certain community elders, that I observed that just taught me so many lessons, and you know, and it's not to deify them in the sense that they didn't have their own challenges and things like that. But even that teaches you a lesson to see, like, yo, when you mess up, you know what I'm saying? How do you, we're talking about that earlier before we got on, like when you mess up, how do you handle that? Do you take ownership? Do you apologize? Do you, or do you like hide away and kind of, try to, hide your flaws and things like that? So all these things I'll say definitely observed from my father, grandfather. And then to your point about rite of passage, I actually went through a rite of, I don't know, this may be one of the questions. I actually went through a rite of passage here. I'm sorry.
No, please share about your experience with rites of passage. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So in the community we have in DC, and we've actually expanded. We have one in Atlanta that's affiliated. It's the same process. We have one in Tallahassee. So we've been expanding, but this process it's 35th, I think, year. But in DC, every year when boys turn 14 or 15, and we're just finishing up, we just had some rituals we're doing this weekend for them. They turn 14 or 15. They go through this process. It's a 6 to 8 month process, and they are trained in all of these aspects of what it means to be a man and things like that. And what I'll say is that the elders who started it in the 80s, they started it during the crack era. Because I remember them telling me when I went through, like they told me, like, because they had a school here in DC, African Center School, and they were losing a lot of their students when crack hit DC. Students was getting killed, things like that. And they were like, to that point that you made about the neighborhood that you live in, they was like, you know what? These kids are going through a rite of passage. They're being trained in a mode of manhood, but it's not African manhood. They're being trained in, a mode of manhood that's harmful to the community. So all that to say, they took it into their own hands and they said, all right, we got to take control of that process. So in addition to my father, grandfather, some of those community elders, I'll say that rite of passage process really solidified a lot of things for me, in terms of what it means to be a man. So I'm 100% with you on this, and I'm here to help in any way, with the rite of passage thing you're trying to do.
Brother, I'm going to be communicating with you more on that. Because I want to kind of add another question to that in a sense of how important is rites of passage for our youth in African traditions?
That's a great question. I mean, I think on the continent, it's not manhood, womanhood. These things were not accidental things that you stumble upon. It's not like the way it is here, where it's like, okay, you're 18, you're 21, now you're a man. No, like there's processes that, usher you into what that society views as being a man. And it's not all the same. They have the Igbo may have different requirements of manhood, than the Yoruba or the Akan or whatever, And I'll even say that within the African-American community, I want to mention this, even though we may not have always had, like, this is a rite of passage process, there are a lot of things that we had. We had the boxing, gym where the old heads trained, they picked these young guys through a rite of passage. We had the football coaches. We had these types of things where these guys would train young men. And so even if we don't necessarily label it a rite of passage, I want to see our community get back more so where you have those men that, help to train young boys into that. So all that to say, it never was an accidental process, just like Ifa initiation is not accidental. You don't stumble into being an Ifa priest. You don't stumble into being an Olorisha. You don't, you're initiated into these things. You're taught. So I think that manhood is very much the same. You're taught by the men in your community what it means to be a man. You're initiated.
That's beautiful. Like, I love the way you put that. You don't stumble into manhood. You don't stumble into it. But the sad thing is, in many ways in our communities, I feel as if in some of the communities, manhood has been stumbled into, or in the lack of definitions or examples, people will create one. One will create one, right? And in terms of these examples, if there's only toxicity in the environment, then what examples will be created? There will be only toxic examples.
Mhm.
So when I look at that, when I think of that question, what I want to also add is this question is, from your unique African diasporic perspective, using African traditions, how do you define manhood?
Ooh, that's a deep question. So without being able to give just like one definition, I'll mention kind of some of these characteristics and responsibilities and things that collectively kind of form manhood. I think manhood is responsibility. I'll say that fatherhood is a rite of passage in itself, as you know. It's a different level. I think that, and that's one of the biggest things that we as brothers go through. You go from just worrying about yourself, being accountable to yourself. That's it. I can do what I want, my time, money, anything. And then you go to like, no, my actions have weight. I need to think about them. Whatever I do affects my children, affects my spouse, whatever. My money, I have to plan, I have to do whatever. So I'll say fatherhood is one of those rite of passages that really usher, like really solidifies this idea of responsibility and purpose for you. I'd say good work ethic too. Yeah, you gotta, everybody don't have the same skills. You ain't got to know how to fix a car. One brother might be good at this, other brother might be good at that, but it's a mentality that, look, something needs to be done. I'm going to figure out how to do it. I'm going to get it done. I would say also, people maybe don't associate nurturing with manhood, but it's a part of it.
It is.
We nurture. We nurture our children. And I think, and something I love about a lot of the Black men in my generation, the generation before me, even some of the things my father talked to us about, is that the old school model, you know what I'm saying, where pops don't say nothing. He just comes from the job. He don't say nothing. He's not emotionally involved. And I understand why that was the case. I understand the extreme racism and things we had to go through. But a lot of us, we're challenging that. And we're a lot more finding ways to be a lot more nurturing and emotionally involved too. I would say another thing I'll mention is how we relate to sisters as well. That's another thing. I think that some of us have, eaten up too much of this Eurocentric concepts of masculinity. Everybody has a different model. You can be the head of your household, but for me, it's like, if you chose the right woman, you chose her for a reason, you know what I'm saying? You have to be humble enough to be able to be held accountable, to be able to say, like, what I'm saying? I chose you. I can trust you, you know what I'm saying? Where I lack, you know what I'm saying? I'm able to be corrected. I'm able to be, like my ears are open, because for some guys, it's like, no, I'm a man. That's it. I have the final say around everything, you know what I'm saying? So I think being able to be corrected, by the people around that you've chosen is an important characteristic. So there's a lot of things I can think of. The last thing I'll say, I wrote a post about how we can look at Orisha as a model for manhood. I'll just run through some of it real quick. I say Orunmila. We can look at Orunmila in just his humility and his patience. It's just so many stories, as you know, where when Orunmila is in situations, you think that he'll take the route of just fighting things head on and reacting and doing things like that. But no, he does that ball. He's patient. He's humble. He stands on his truth and things work out for him. He doesn't always need to be, so outwardly like, I'm this. No, he follows Ifa. He does what he needs to do. And his actions and things speak for themselves. I mentioned Ogun as well. Sometimes stuff needs to just be cleared away. You know what I'm saying? And that's what you got to do. And the building aspect of it, I think about iron, like, we have to be builders. We have to be facilitators. We have to clear the path, you know what I'm saying, for the community. I say Shango. That fire is important. It ain't always time to be chill and sometimes it's time to bring out that fire. Sometimes it's time to bring out them 200 thunderstones that Shango uses, but you got to temper that. And the last one I'll mention is Arbatala. Arbatala with the creative aspect of manhood, the purity, the way that he, can move slow with things and very intentional and things like that. So all that, I know I went off on the whole thing, but all that to say, like, we can pull from these models within our traditions as well for what manhood is.
And that's perfect. Thank you for that. When you mention those things in terms of the spectrum of manhood and masculinity, the other thing I think about is just how, I'll say, like, my father, for example, I saw other aspects of his development, of his emotion and so on, when I had children. It's so funny to think about this. Is like, I mean, when you were talking about that, I thought of a bunch of things, but one of the things that I thought of is, like, I hug and kiss my sons.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And it's something that I recognized even with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
that when I had my first son, it was like I saw this interesting side of him.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like this side of him come out where, he's always a sweethearted person, but he was just like so embracing, and I never got that many kisses from my dad before. You know what I'm saying? But it's beautiful and it's healing and all of that. And it's like, with my sons, it's the same thing. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
Being a man, it's a continuum. It's a spectrum of things. It's really an aspect of humanity as well, confined within the masculine structure. It's a time to go to war.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a time to make peace. It's a time to embrace. And it's a time to, squabble up, as we say it out here.
Yeah.
And it's a balance. There's wisdom. There's responsibility. All these things that you've shared as well are so, so very important in that. So I want to kind of riff a little bit. This last questioner that I kind of sent you is, like, I've noticed also that you have a fitness routine, a fitness regimen that you also incorporate. And I love physical fitness as well. And that's definitely something essential that I do. And I wanted to ask, like, how important is physical fitness to, like, your perspective of masculinity, manhood, fatherhood, what have you? And how important is that to you? How?
Man, that's a great question. I mean, I think again, watching my pops is a martial artist like you. He's done martial arts as long as I can remember. He's, even now, I say, man, I couldn't take my pops in a fight. I couldn't outrun him. You know what I'm saying? He's approaching about 60 soon, but he bikes in marathons. He swims, he does all this stuff. You know what I'm saying? So that was kind of always a model that I saw. But I'll say it's important for two reasons. Number one, the obvious reason is just protection. You know what I'm saying? You I don't care how you slice it about gender roles, anything like that. As a man, you got a family, you got to be able to do 10 push-ups. You got to be able to, you know what I'm saying, just to be able to protect your family. You know what I'm saying? But also, I'll say, for more like internal reasons, like, man, it just reminds you of your power, man. Like, sometimes you just be struggling, man. It's just like, let me get in the gym. And when I get in the gym, it's like everything is a ritual, you know what I'm saying? And it's a ritual to just remind you of your power, man. Like, and it motivates me, it invigorates me. Another reason I'll add to that too is one thing I've realized with many of our elders and ancestors, unfortunately, is that in the context of the work that they did, they kind of neglected their physical health. And so they fought for the movement. They did this, but they're eating, they're exercise, they're things like that. And, when they get to be 60, 70 or whatever, they're just in poor health. And so that's something I realized is like, all right, we doing the spiritual stuff, we're doing the mental stuff. We got to take care of our bodies, man. You know, so for me, that's one thing my dad taught me, and that's one big thing that I want my kids to see it too. Like I want them to see me working out. My daughter be trying to do push-ups. She be trying, look, Dad can do push-ups. You know, so hopefully that answers the question. I think it's absolutely essential.
Of course. You know, with one of my other brothers, Oyedare, I remember him being on his fitness journey, and then that kind of inspired me to be more on my fitness journey. One thing I would say is good brothers sharpen other brothers. And I would also add to that, for me, is like as a priest, as a Awo SU priest, as I'm working, one thing I realized is being able to have physical strength also supports my spiritual fortitude and my spiritual strength. And physical strength also assists in, honestly shaking off if someone's wishing bad, throwing stuff or whatever negative forces. Yeah. I'm boxing, I'm kicking, I'm pushing, I'm lifting these weights, and I'm lifting that weight off of me as well. I'm sweating it out. My lymphatic system is kicking it out. I'm going, I'm trying to eat right. I'm going to the bathroom. I'm doing all these things. And that too, is what you're saying is that is part of the process. And also that too is Ebo, the Ebo of life, man. I remember Baba Fashino used to say something around breath, inhaling the breath, exhaling the breath. That is Ebo. It's all very important. I want to ask you this this last question, and then kind of open it up if you have anything you want to share as well. But I want to ask this question mainly because, I think this kind of encapsulates what we've kind of talked about. But why is African spirituality, African language, cosmology, philosophy, why is it important to the liberation of African people in the diaspora?
Man, that's such a great and important question, man. I actually, and there was a time on my page where I was just like making a series of posts where I started out by making a list of the reasons why I practice African spirituality, why I think it's important. And like I took months to just go through each list. I'm gonna go through each item on the list. Man, there's a few reasons. Number one, I think that some of these things that are core to African spirituality have always been our power base, right? So for example, the concept of destiny, right? Like we're here for a purpose, and tapping into that purpose can help guide and align your life. You know what I'm saying? So I think that that's definitely an important part of African liberation. You know what I'm saying? To be clear about what role we each have to play in this thing that we're doing. Number two, the ancestor piece. I won't demonize any other religions, but some of the Abrahamic faiths, they frown upon that ancestral connection. Man, that's always been our power base, right? And so we can tap into these freedom fighters and people who have gone before us. The communication doesn't stop. You know what I'm saying? Our ancestors have always understood that, and so I think that that's an important part of liberation. And African spirituality not only embraces that, but it provides systems, whether it's through a Google, whether it's through whatever other, systems of worship. Like our ancestral traditions provide the means for us to still communicate and gain knowledge and power and stuff from those people who have gone on. They've been here, they've done the stuff that we do. I think, man, just even from you were talking earlier, you were talking about a particular crochet that can be made with certain items and things like that. Man, like our people have always, whether it's in Haiti and the poisons and all these different things that our ancestors knew how to use, like we've always been people of the land. You know what I'm saying? And the stuff that the liberation efforts that we're talking about doing, we got to be able to be tapped into the land. We got to be aware of what plants do what. You know, like we say, you say Kosi Ewe, Kosi Orisha. Like no Ewe, there's no Orisha. We gotta know what plants do what. We gotta be able to grow stuff. We gotta be able. So I think that African spiritual traditions keep us tapped in, and you have to have a knowledge of that. Man, you know, I could go on and on and on. I last one I'll say, which is always a big one to me, the power of the feminine. Certain Abrahamic faiths want to separate us from that. And, you know, it's not to say the feminine over the masculine, but it's almost like this. We're out of balance. You know what I'm saying? And so our traditions will help us to tap into that mother energy, which within Ifa, it's such a major part of our tradition that we can't ignore it. Whether it's Oshun, whether it's Odu being a central deity to our practice as Ifa priests, whether it's Oya, whether it's Yemoja, whether it's Edan of Ogboni being a central part, whether it's the Iyami, whether it's Gelede, whether it like all of these, our traditions have always given us a way to tap into that mother energy, that power. Whereas certain Abrahamic faiths, they put us in an imbalance and they suppress and they quiet that down. So I think that in terms of our liberation efforts, tapping into that mother energy is a very important key that will unlock things for us as a people. So I can go on, but I'll say that those are some of the multitude of ways that African spirituality can practically help us with liberation and to just better our lives.
Yeah, I say, man. Wow, that to me is a great sum up. You know, like everything that you've shared, it really, to me, I already knew communicating with you would be something very rich and important and essential in this process, but you confirmed all of that. You know, I want to ask if you have any last words, anything that you would want to share, anything you would like to add.
No, I mean, this has just been an honor, man. You know, I love and support everything that you do. You know what I'm saying? I watch all of it, from the fitness to the services that you do. I tap into live sometimes. You know, I see the stuff that you're doing with your family, all that stuff. Really love it, really support it. You know what I'm saying? And you know, one thing I love about being in Nigeria is that, man, like sometimes I'm in Nigeria, you know, I just spend nearly a month in Nigeria. And you just spending so much time with brothers, man. Like y'all chilling when y'all not doing any firework, y'all eating, you know what I'm saying? You may be just, you know, drinking a little beer, talking about life, talking about family. When you do any firework, you know, from the youngest to the oldest, you know, the youngest can touch his head to the mat and drop some wisdom of what he knows all the way to the oldest. So like really being in that space with those brothers amongst other Black men and stuff like that for so long, then when I come back here, you know, sometimes I find myself like, you know, missing that, you know. So it's always an honor to connect with a fellow brother, Ifa priest, you know what I'm saying? I look forward to, you know, more of these efforts, just more, you know what I'm saying, Black men just building as our roles, you know, it's just absolutely essential.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, bro, your work inspires me. It inspires what I do. And I'm so thankful that you shared this time with me, you know, and also whatever I can do to help assist. I mean, you're doing so much and you're so ahead, but whatever I can do to just add or support or help or whatever, you know, you have my support, you have my love, and you have my respect, you know, and I thank you for you know, just tapping in with us, you know. And where can people reach you, I guess on social media, and also tap into your content, and also tap into the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so you can follow me. So by the time that, you know, this is out, I may have my website up. So I may send that to you if you add in the comments. If not, it's okay. But people can reach me at Orire on Instagram. So ORIIRE on Instagram. That's where I do a lot of my content. Dropping a website and some more stuff soon. I just had to revamp it. Yeah, so that's the best way for people to tap in with me for now.
Oh, also, I wanted to announce as well for you the weekend that this is broadcasting. Our brother Ade or Ire, you're going to be. I think it's the Buku Hoodoo.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. In
in,
New
you're
Orleans. Yeah.
in New Orleans. So on this weekend of the 20th,
Yes.
21st,
20th to the 23rd. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, you'll be in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
with the I don't know I don't know the name of it, but is it the Hoodoo Conference? Is that
Yeah,
it? Or
Buku Hoodoo Fest. Yeah, you said it correctly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah. So tap in with that. That's going to be interesting. I really wish I could go, but I'm out here with the kids and the fam. But it's
I
all good.
appreciate it, man. I know you got a lot of stuff going on. You're doing great work, man.
Thank you so much, man. So with that, y'all, please let us thank this brother and give him more ashe to do the work he does. May Oladamari, the ancestors, Mawulisa, all the Orishas support, protect you, guide you in your process. And brother, whatever I can do to support you, let me know and I will do it. Making some men. Thank you for making this a great one, bro. Peace.
Thank you too.